They believed that a single piece of paper, signed in a hospital room they never bothered to visit, would let them throw me out of the home I had given 10 years of my life to protect. What they did not understand was that those same 10 years had quietly armed me with everything I needed to take it all back. My name is Margaret. At 47 years old, I lived in a small town just outside Columbus, Ohio, in the same house I had grown up in, caring around the clock for my dying mother. Once, a long time ago, I had been a registered nurse with a real career, a steady paycheck, and a future of my own, but for the last decade I had no job, no savings, and no life that belonged to me. I had given all of it away, willingly and lovingly, to the woman who raised me. And the people who should have stood beside me through it, my own brother and sister, had spent those same 10 years pretending I did not exist, right up until the moment they decided I was in their way. For as long as I can remember, I believed that family meant showing up. I was raised by my mother, Eleanor, alongside my older brother, Bradley, who is now 51, and my younger sister, Vanessa, who is now 43. Our father passed away when I was still in nursing school, and after that, the three of us were all our mother had left. At least, that is what I believed. I believed that when the time came, we would carry her together. I was completely wrong. To Bradley and Vanessa, our mother was not a person to be cared for. She was an inheritance to be collected, and I was not a sister to be respected. I was the unpaid help who would keep our mother alive and comfortable until the day they could divide up what she left behind. My loyalty, my training, and my soft heart were treated as conveniences, things they could rely on so that they would never have to lift a finger or cancel a vacation. I did not see it for what it was until it was almost too late. To understand how they were able to stand in our mother's kitchen on the day of her funeral and tell me to pack my things, you have to understand the roles we had all been handed long ago. Bradley was the prince. He was the firstborn son. And in our mother's eyes, he could do no wrong. He moved 2 states away the moment he turned 20, built a comfortable life as a sales executive, and visited maybe twice a year, always for a single afternoon, always leaving before dinner. Vanessa was the baby, the delicate one, the one everyone agreed was too sensitive and too overwhelmed to handle anything difficult. And me, the middle child, I was the dependable one. I was the one who could handle it. That word followed me my whole life. Margaret can handle it. Margaret will figure it out. Margaret does not need help. The differences in how we were treated were never subtle. When Bradley bought his first house, our mother withdrew $18,000 from her savings to help with his down payment, and she told all of her friends at church about her successful son for months. When Vanessa got divorced, our mother took out a personal loan to cover her legal fees and let her move back home rent-free for a year while she found herself. And when I, 2 years out of nursing school, asked my mother to co-sign a modest loan so I could buy a small condo of my own, she sighed and told me that she did not want to risk her credit and that surely a strong, independent girl like me could manage without her help. So I managed. I always managed. That was the whole problem. That was the day that changed everything arrived when I was 37 years old. My mother had a stroke, and then, in the months that followed, she was diagnosed with a slow and merciless form of dementia. The doctors were clear. She could not live alone. She needed full-time care, the kind that costs a fortune in a facility, the kind that swallows a family's entire savings within a couple of years. There was a family meeting. There is always a family meeting. Bradley flew in for the afternoon. Vanessa drove down for the day, and around that same kitchen table where we had eaten dinner as children, they laid out the plan. Bradley said that a nursing home was simply too expensive, that it would burn through Mom's savings and leave nothing behind, and that it would break her heart to be locked away with strangers. Vanessa cried and said she could not possibly be a caregiver, that she was too fragile, that she had her own healing to do. And then they both turned and looked at me. Bradley said it so gently, so reasonably. "Margaret, you are a nurse. You already know how to do all of this. You are the only one who can. We would just be paying strangers to do what you can do out of love." He said that I should move into the family home, leave my job for a little while, and care for our mother there. And in exchange, he said, of course the house would be mine someday. It only made sense. Mom would want the person who sacrificed for her to have it. I want you to understand something. I did not agree because I was promised a house. I agreed because she was my mother, and I loved her, and I could not bear the thought of her frightened and alone in a strange room. But I would be lying if I said the promise did not matter. It did. Because it meant that when this was all over, I would not be left with nothing. I would have a home. They all nodded. They all agreed. And then they got in their cars and drove back to their own lives, and they left me alone with her. So I did it. I gave my notice at the hospital where I had worked for 9 years. I let my own small apartment go. I packed up my life, and I moved back into my childhood bedroom at the age of 37, and I became my mother's full-time caregiver. I told myself it would be a couple of years. It lasted 10. People who have never done it cannot imagine what those years were like. Dementia does not move quickly. It takes everything from a person one small piece at a time, and it takes it from the caregiver too. I bathed my mother, I dressed her, I cooked every meal and coaxed her to eat when she forgot how. I managed a dozen medications on a strict schedule. I sat up through countless nights when she was frightened and did not know where she was or who I was. I held her hand through the days when she screamed at me, certain I was a stranger trying to hurt her, and I held her hand through the rare, precious afternoons when the fog lifted and she knew me again and called me her good girl. I did all of this with no salary, no time off, and almost no help. In 10 years, Bradley visited a handful of times, always briefly, always with an excuse ready for why he had to leave. Vanessa called on holidays. Neither of them ever offered me a single dollar, a single weekend of relief, or a single word of real gratitude. And here is the part that quietly bankrupted me. My mother's savings, the savings that were supposed to cover her care, ran dry within the first few years, drained by years of helping Bradley and Vanessa. So I began paying. I covered her medications. I paid for the specialist visits, the medical equipment, the home modifications, the ramp, the hospital bed, the supplies. Over the years, working odd shifts online whenever I could, I poured more than $212,000 of my own money into keeping my mother safe and comfortable in that house. And I documented every cent of it, not because I was planning anything, but because I was a nurse. And keeping careful records was simply who I was. That habit, the quiet, unremarkable habit of writing everything down, would one day become the thing that saved me. I remember one winter in particular, the 5th or 6th year, when my mother caught pneumonia, and I did not sleep more than 2 hours a night for nearly 3 weeks. I monitored her oxygen, ran the nebulizer treatments, changed her bedding when she could not make it to the bathroom, and called the doctor at every turn, all while running on coffee and fear. At the worst of it, terrified she might not survive the night, I called Bradley and asked him just once to fly in for a few days so that I could sleep and not make a mistake out of exhaustion. He told me he was swamped at work, that flights were expensive that time of year, and that I was the nurse. So surely I had it under control. He told me to call him if anything changed. Then he wished me luck and hung up. My mother pulled through that winter because of the hours I poured into her, and I never asked him for help again. I learned slowly and painfully that the more capable I proved myself to be, the more permission everyone felt to do absolutely nothing. There were small kindnesses too, and those are the moments I hold on to. There was the afternoon she suddenly recognized an old song on the radio and sang every word clear as day, and we danced together in the kitchen for 2 minutes before the fog rolled back in. There was the morning she looked at me, lucid and calm, and apologized for never standing up for me when I was a child, for always letting the others have the easier road. I told her it did not matter anymore, and in that moment, it truly did not. Those moments were the whole reason I stayed. They were never going to show up in any will, but they were mine, and no one could take them. In the final 2 years, as my mother slipped further away, she would have moments of startling clarity. In those moments, she would grip my hand and say the same thing again and again. She would tell me that I was the only one who stayed. She would tell me that the house was mine, that I had earned it 10 times over, that she would never let her other 2 children take it from the daughter who gave up everything. One quiet evening, with her old leather-bound family Bible open on her lap, she made me promise to remember that she wanted me to have the home. And without thinking much of it, because I had started recording her good days just to have something to hold on to when she was gone, I had my phone sitting on the table beside us, capturing her voice, soft and certain, telling me that the house belonged to me. My mother passed away on a cold morning in February, with me holding her hand the way I had held it for 10 years. I was shattered. For a full decade, my entire identity had been wrapped around caring for her, and suddenly she was gone, and the house was silent, and I did not know who I was anymore. I was drowning in grief, and it was in exactly that moment, when I was at my weakest, that my brother and sister made their move. The funeral was on a Saturday. Bradley and Vanessa flew and drove in, dressed beautifully, weeping for the audience of relatives and church friends, accepting condolences as the devoted children of a beloved mother. I stood at the back, exhausted and hollow, and I let them have their performance because I was too tired to fight and because, in my grief, I still believed we were a family sharing a loss. After the service, everyone gathered back at the house, and once the last of the guests had gone, Bradley closed the front door, turned to me, and pulled a folded document out of his jacket. He told me, in a calm and businesslike voice, that there was something I needed to see. It was a will, a new will, he said, signed by our mother just 11 months before she died. According to that document, the house, the only thing of value she had left, was to be divided equally among the three of us, with Bradley named as the sole executor. And since the house could not be sliced into pieces, Bradley explained, the only fair thing to do was to sell it and split the money 3 ways. I stood there in the living room I had not left in 10 years, and I could not breathe. I asked him what he was talking about. I told him that Mom had promised me the house, that she had told me so 100 times. Vanessa, dabbing at her eyes, said in a small, wounded voice, "Margaret, you cannot honestly expect to keep the whole house. That would not be fair to the rest of us. We are her children too." Bradley nodded and added, almost kindly, that the will was signed and witnessed and perfectly legal, that a lawyer had handled it, and that there was really nothing to discuss. And then he said the thing that I will never forget as long as I live. He looked around the house I had kept clean and warm and safe for our dying mother, and he said, "You will need to be out within 30 days so we can list it. You can take your personal belongings, of course." I had given them 10 years. I had given up my career, my savings, my marriage prospects, my health, and the better part of my own middle age. And on the day we buried our mother, they handed me 30 days and a cardboard box. Something inside me, something that had been bending and bending for 47 years, finally went very still. I did not scream. I did not collapse. I did not beg them to reconsider. I simply looked at my brother and my sister, these 2 strangers wearing the faces of my family, and I said very quietly, "All right, I understand." And I watched a flicker of relief cross their faces, because they thought, the way they always had, that Margaret would handle it, that Margaret would not make a fuss, that Margaret would quietly accept whatever scraps she was given. That was the last time they would ever underestimate me. The next morning, instead of packing boxes, I sat down at the kitchen table with 10 years of my life spread out in front of me, 10 years of caregiving logs written in my own careful nurse's handwriting, documenting every medication, every appointment, every crisis, 10 years of receipts and bank statements showing the $212,000 I had spent keeping my mother alive, letters, text messages, and on my phone, dozens of recordings of my mother's voice, including the quiet evening with her Bible open on her lap, telling me plainly that the house was mine. Then I made a phone call, not to my brother. I called a probate litigation attorney named Ruth Calloway, a woman known across 3 counties for taking apart bad wills and the people who wrote them. I sat in her office and I laid everything out on her desk. The new will, the 10 years of records, the recordings, the history of a family that had handed all the love to 2 children and all the labor to a 3rd. Ruth listened without saying a word, slowly turning the pages of my caregiving logs. When she finally looked up, she was not smiling with pity. She was smiling like a woman who had just been handed a winning hand. She told me that my brother and sister had made a serious mistake. She said, "Margaret, they think this signed will protect them. What it actually does is open the door to two of the strongest claims in probate law, and you have the evidence to prove both of them." The first claim, she explained, was undue influence, a will signed by a woman with advancing dementia just 11 months before her death, leaving everything to be split in a way that conveniently benefited the two children who provided no care, while erasing every promise she had made to the daughter who gave up everything. Ruth wanted to know exactly when and where that will had been signed and who had been in the room, because if a vulnerable, cognitively impaired woman had been taken somewhere by the very people who stood to gain and pressured into signing, that will could be challenged and thrown out entirely. The second claim was something I had never even heard of. Ruth told me that under the law, when a person provides years of valuable care to another with the reasonable expectation of being compensated and that promise is not honored, they can bring a claim for the value of the services they provided. It is called a claim for caregiver compensation, and it does not even depend on the will. She looked at my logs and my receipts and told me that 10 years of round-the-clock, skilled nursing care, the kind that would cost a fortune at any agency in the state, had a real and provable dollar value, a very large one. The execution began quietly and precisely. Ruth's first move was not a lawsuit. It was a single letter sent to Bradley as executor, formally notifying him that the will was being contested on the grounds of undue influence and the testator's compromised mental capacity, and that a separate claim was being filed against the estate for the reasonable value of 10 years of professional caregiving services in an amount exceeding $400,000. The letter also placed a legal hold on the property, which meant that the house could not be sold, listed, or touched while the dispute was unresolved. Bradley's reaction was instant and furious. My phone lit up with his name. I let it ring. Then came the text messages, all the warmth gone now, calling me ungrateful, calling me greedy, telling me I was tearing the family apart over money. Vanessa sent a long message full of tears and accusations, asking how I could do this to them while our mother was barely in the ground. I did not reply to either of them. I let Ruth Calloway do the talking, in the only language my brother and sister had ever truly understood, the language of consequences. Then, the evidence began to do its work. Ruth subpoenaed the records around the signing of the new will, and a clear and ugly picture emerged. The will had been drafted and signed during a brief visit when Bradley had flown into town at a small office that he had chosen and driven our mother to himself. On a day when, according to my own detailed caregiving logs, my mother had been deeply confused and unable to recognize me for most of the morning. There was no independent doctor's assessment of her capacity. The witnesses barely knew her, and against all of that stood my recordings, my mother's own voice, clear and loving and certain, saying again and again that the house belonged to the daughter who stayed. The case never even reached a full trial. Faced with the recordings, the medical timeline, the 10 years of meticulous documentation, and the very real possibility that a court would void the will entirely and then still order the estate to pay my $400,000 caregiver claim, Bradley's confidence collapsed. His own lawyer told him in plain terms that he was going to lose, and that if the undue influence claim succeeded, it would not just cost him the house, it would raise serious questions about how a vulnerable woman had been handled in her final years. Bradley tried, near the end, to offer me a deal. He called me directly, his voice suddenly soft and brotherly again, and proposed that we drop all of it and simply split the house down the middle, just the two of us, and leave Vanessa out. I had spent my whole life being managed by that voice. This time I felt nothing at all. I told him to speak to my attorney, and I hung up. The man who had once handed me 30 days in a cardboard box was now the one doing the begging, and I no longer needed anything he had to offer. The settlement was total. The new will was set aside. In exchange for me agreeing not to pursue the full caregiver compensation claim in open court, where the details of their neglect would become a matter of public record, Bradley and Vanessa both signed away every claim to the house. The home that I had protected for 10 years, the home my mother had promised me with her own voice, became mine, free and clear, with the deed in my name alone. The fallout reached far beyond the house. The truth of what had happened did not stay quiet in our small town. The church friends and relatives who had watched Bradley and Vanessa weep so beautifully at the funeral slowly learned the real story, that the two devoted children had tried to evict the daughter who gave up a decade of her life and had pressured a woman with dementia into signing away her promise. Bradley, who valued his polished image above almost everything, found that image in ruins among the very people whose admiration he had always craved. Vanessa stopped showing her face at family gatherings entirely. The two of them, who had spent their whole lives being handed everything, walked away from the estate with nothing because they had reached for everything. I changed the locks, not out of fear, but as a quiet, final act of ownership. I blocked their numbers. I routed any remaining legal matters through Ruth's office, and I closed the door on that chapter of my family for good. It has been 2 years now since the morning I sat down at that kitchen table and decided I would not simply handle it one more time. I am sitting in the living room of my home, the home my mother wanted me to have, and it is mine in every way that matters. I went back to nursing, this time in a gentler role, teaching home care skills to new caregivers, the very thing I learned the hard way. The house is full of light again. I have planted a garden in the backyard where my mother used to sit. And on warm evenings, I sit out there with a cup of tea and I talk to her. And I tell her that I kept my promise and that I believe she kept hers. Looking back, it still astonishes me how much I gave and how long I let myself be taken for granted before I finally stood up and protected myself. But if my story has taught me anything, it is this. There are people who will gladly accept your every sacrifice and feel that they owe you nothing in return, and sometimes those people share your last name. Loving someone does not require you to let yourself be erased. Standing up for what you have earned is not greed, and it is not betrayal. It is simply the moment you finally decide that you matter too. I know in my heart that I made the right choice, but I want to hear from you. Do you think I was right to fight for the home I sacrificed everything to protect, or would you have walked away and kept the peace? Let me know in the comments below. And if my story gave you any comfort or strength today, please subscribe and turn on notifications so that you never miss the next one. Thank you so much for listening.